On February 17, 1944, the lagoon at Truk burned under a once bright tropical sky, now black with smoke. For 2 years, this base had been Japan's strongest fortress in the Central Pacific, but on this morning it was collapsing under a massive American assault. Inside the bridge of the battleship USS Iowa, the ship surged forward at 32 knots across waters that had been considered untouchable by the enemy just hours earlier. Captain John McCrae stood beside the plotting table, examining the reports pouring in from aircraft overhead. The numbers were staggering. American carriers had already sunk dozens of Japanese merchant ships, and nearly 250 enemy aircraft had been destroyed in the air or on the ground. But something new appeared on the radar. Several Japanese warships fleeing through the northern passes. They were damaged, running for safety, trying to escape the destruction inside the lagoon. And now Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, made a surprising decision even his staff didn't expect. He wanted a surface engagement. He wanted the battleships Iowa and New Jersey unleashed to chase these enemy ships down and finish them. What would happen over the next 2 hours would set a record that still stands today: the longest-range surface gunnery engagement between battleships and enemy vessels in naval history. Spruance's decision shocked some of his commanders because carriers could have easily finished off the fleeing ships without risking American surface vessels. But Spruance understood something deeper. Although aircraft had replaced battleships as the main striking power of the modern Navy, the battleships still had a purpose, and he wanted to prove that American surface forces were not outdated. The Japanese ships fleeing Truk included the light cruiser Katori, destroyers Mikasa and Nowaki, the auxiliary cruiser Akagi Maru, and a small minesweeper. Most had already been damaged by American air attacks. They were fast, but Iowa and New Jersey were faster, and most importantly, they had radar. The American battleships did not need to see the enemy to track them. Shortly after 1300 hours, scout planes confirmed the Japanese position. The enemy ships were roughly 30 miles northwest of Truk and heading north. On Iowa's bridge, Captain McCrae received a steady flow of data from fire control operators below. The range was 32,000 yards, 18 miles, beyond the horizon, invisible to the naked eye. But the radar showed them as clear tracks moving across the screen. Admiral Willis A. Lee, commanding the battleship division, gave the order: prepare for surface action. Below decks, Iowa's gunnery crews sprang into motion. Each of the ship's 3 main turrets held 3 gigantic 16-inch guns, 9 in total. Each gun barrel was 66 feet long, capable of firing shells weighing nearly 1.5 tons. For this mission, the crew selected the high-capacity 1,900-pound shells, designed to tear apart lightly armored ships like destroyers and the cruiser Katori. In the plotting rooms, the ship's analog fire control computers, known as rangekeepers, hummed as they processed constant updates from the radar. These mechanical computers, filled with gears, cams, and rotating wheels, calculated not only the enemy's speed and course, but also Iowa's movement, wind direction, air density, and even the Earth's rotation. Everything was computed to determine exactly where the target would be when the shell arrived over a minute later. It was a level of precision warfare the Japanese could hardly imagine. At 14,500 yards, still over 7 miles away, Iowa opened fire. The ship shuddered from the recoil as the first salvo erupted from turret 2. The overpressure from the blast was so immense it could injure anyone standing unprotected on deck. The shells soared into the sky, then began their long descent. 45 seconds later, 3 towering columns of water erupted around the Japanese light cruiser Katori. One shell fell short, another long, the third just off the ship's side. A perfect straddle. The next salvo would be deadly. Katori tried to maneuver. Her captain, Takao Sato, knew he was facing the most advanced fire control system of the war, although he did not understand just how accurate it was. She fired her own guns and even launched torpedoes, but the range was too great. The Japanese optical rangefinders could not accurately track a target beyond the horizon. The torpedoes missed by hundreds of yards. Iowa fired again, her shots becoming more precise. The analog computer updated instant by instant. adjusting for every change in movement. The fourth salvo hit. Massive explosions tore through Katori's superstructure, ripping open her bridge and engineering spaces. Fires spread quickly. Her consort, the destroyer Mikaze, tried desperately to lay smoke and draw the American fire, even launching torpedoes at the American battleships. New Jersey maneuvered to avoid the torpedoes, which passed just ahead of her bow. Meanwhile, American heavy cruisers, Minneapolis and New Orleans, closed the distance and added their 8-inch guns to the attack. Overhead, aircraft from the light carrier Cowpen circled, keeping watch for submarines and confirming hits. Katori fought stubbornly, firing her guns even as she listed heavily, but she was hopelessly outmatched. At 13:43 hours, after 11 minutes under heavy fire, she rolled over and sank. Captain Sato and all of his approximately 300 crew members went down with the ship. None survived. The destroyer Mikaze became the next target. Outgunned, she attempted another torpedo attack, but American cruisers tore into her with accurate fire. Shell after shell smashed into the destroyer until her magazine exploded, breaking her in two. All hands were lost. Milwaukee, the last surviving destroyer, was faster and managed to pull away at 35 knots. Iowa and New Jersey gave chase, firing long-range salvos at extreme distances, up to 35,700 yards, or 20.3 miles, the longest-range naval gunfire engagement ever recorded. Several salvos straddled Milwaukee, causing splinter damage and casualties, but she finally slipped into a rain squall and escaped. The Japanese auxiliary cruiser Akagi Maru had already been destroyed earlier by aircraft, struck by bombs that triggered massive explosions. The small minesweeper was finished by an American destroyer. In 90 minutes, 3 Japanese ships had been sunk and 1 heavily damaged. American casualties were 0. When the guns finally went silent, the air around the USS Iowa was still shaking from the echoes of her own power. The crew stood exhausted but proud. The smell of gunpowder drifted through every passageway. Inside the plotting room, operators slowly pulled off their headphones, realizing they had just helped make history. On the bridge, Captain McCrae received a short, calm message from Admiral Lee on the New Jersey. "Cease fire. Excellent shooting." Everyone knew what that meant. The impossible had been done. They had fought and destroyed enemy ships that none of them could even see with their eyes. It had all been done through machines, mathematics, and human skill. An invisible duel fought across 20 miles of ocean. Radar had truly changed the face of naval warfare. In earlier wars, gunners had depended on what they could see through binoculars or optical rangefinders. But visibility at sea was often terrible. Fog, rain, darkness, and smoke made accurate shooting nearly impossible. That day at Truk, the Americans had proven that eyes were no longer needed. From now on, radar could track and kill an enemy long before he was visible. The Japanese Navy, once masters of night combat, had no defense against this new form of warfare. They had been trained to fight by sight, by instinct, by courage. But courage alone could not compete with radar-guided precision. For the crew of the Iowa, the engagement felt like something far greater than a simple victory. It was proof of what American engineering and training could achieve under pressure. The battleship had been designed to fight other giants, enemy battleships with equal power, but instead it had used its might against smaller, desperate targets. Still, the test had been real, and it had proven the ship's systems in the best way possible. Under fire. The gunnery officers later analyzed every shot, studying where shells landed and how the radar tracked movement. They found the new Mark 8 fire control radar had performed beyond expectation. Even when the target zigzagged or changed speed, the radar kept perfect lock, predicting where the ship would be before the shells even reached the water. Down below in the mess deck, sailors sat quietly eating their first meal in hours. The excitement was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion. The ship's constant vibration from firing had left everyone's bones buzzing. Some men joked that they'd never hear properly again. Others stared at nothing, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. A few new friends aboard the aircraft overhead that had spotted the targets. For them, it was teamwork. Ships and planes, steel and sweat, all working together to strike as one. Far above, the sky was still filled with streaks of smoke and drifting oil fires from the morning's air attack. Truk Lagoon, once called the Gibraltar of the Pacific, was finished. The Japanese Navy had lost so many ships that it would never recover its power in that region. In just 2 days, more than 40 merchant ships and warships were destroyed. Nearly 300 aircraft were gone. Thousands of Japanese sailors were dead or trapped on sinking wrecks. The once feared base, surrounded by coral reefs and dense defenses, had become a floating graveyard. In Washington, D.C., the reports from Truk arrived like a thunderclap. The victory confirmed what many strategists had suspected. The Imperial Japanese Navy was broken. Its remaining ships could no longer operate together as a single fighting force. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, later said that Truk had been neutralized as an effective base. He praised the surface fleet's precision and the combination of radar, air power, and aggressive leadership. In private, he also recognized something deeper. This was the moment when the era of the battleship truly ended. Even though Iowa and New Jersey had performed flawlessly, it was clear that aircraft carriers were now the true masters of the sea. For Admiral Spruance, however, the surface action at Truk was more than symbolic. He had proven that even in a world dominated by airplanes, battleships still had value. They could strike, defend, and endure punishment that no other vessel could survive. He later wrote in his report that Iowa's engagement demonstrated the effectiveness of radar-directed fire at extreme range, and that such capabilities must be exploited in future operations. Those words would shape American naval doctrine for years to come. Meanwhile, back aboard Iowa, the crew slowly settled back into routine. Damage control teams checked for minor structural stress. The guns were inspected, their barrels cleaned and cooled. Technicians reviewed the fire control data printouts. Endless rolls of numbers and mechanical readings. Every shot was logged, every adjustment recorded. The accuracy of the hits stunned even veteran officers. At over 35,000 yards, they had struck a moving ship traveling 25 knots, something no Navy in history had done before. That night, as darkness spread across the Pacific, the men of the Iowa gathered on deck. The stars above were bright and countless. The lagoon behind them still glowed faintly from burning wrecks. It was a quiet, almost peaceful scene, the aftermath of something massive. Some sailors leaned against the railings, smoking in silence, staring at the horizon where the last fight had taken place. One gunner's mate whispered, "We hit them before we could even see them." "That's not war anymore. That's science." Another replied softly, "Whatever it is, it works." The next morning, the fleet turned west toward the Marshall Islands. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened. But for those who had been there, something fundamental had changed. The combination of radar, analog computers, and big gunfire had redefined the very idea of naval combat. It was no longer about who could see first. It was about who could detect, calculate, and strike first. The Iowa's crew had witnessed the transition from traditional warfare to a technological era. Historians would later call this the end of the old Navy. Battleships, once symbols of national pride and power, had been eclipsed by something invisible: radar waves and aircraft. Yet for a brief shining moment in 1944, the USS Iowa had shown the world that the age of steel giants still had one final blaze of glory. Her guns, her crew, and her precision had marked the last great chapter in the story of naval gunnery. Decades later, when the Iowa became a museum ship, veterans who had served aboard her during the war would tell visitors about that day near Truk Lagoon. They would describe the shockwave that shook the whole ship, the heat of the guns, the roar that felt like thunder tearing the sky apart. They would talk about watching a faraway horizon explode from shells they fired almost a full minute before. And they would remember how it felt when the radar operator calmly said, "Target hit." It was pride, fear, and awe all at once. A reminder that technology and courage together had changed history. Even now, the record of that shot stands. Over 20 miles. Fired by a battleship at a target beyond human sight. No other surface engagement has matched it. It remains a symbol of a turning point, where the courage of men and the precision of machines met perfectly for a single moment on the open sea. The USS Iowa sailed onward through the rest of the war, bombarding shore positions, supporting landings, and guarding carrier groups. She survived typhoons, kamikaze attacks, and endless months at sea. She would even later carry a U.S. president and serve in 3 different wars. But among all her missions, none would ever match the strange, awe-inspiring duel near Truk, where she fired into the future itself. In that single day, the ocean bore witness to something new, the end of one era and the beginning of another. The sea that had once belonged to eyes and instincts now belonged to radar screens and electronic pulses. The world had changed, and the USS Iowa had been the first to show it.